And we are live. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Forever Sports. It is Tuesday, and we are 48 hours out from Rassie Erasmus's team announcement for the weekend. And that's going to dominate most of the discussion this week. Who will he pick to take on Ireland and try and get us over that last hurdle that Rassie Erasmus currently have, which is having never beaten Ireland in Ireland, as well as they've definitely been a bogey team in the last few years, definitely beaten the box a lot more than we have beaten them in the last sort of basically 10 years. But before we sort of get into that, it's been very interesting sort of last hour really with the announcement, last couple of hours, that the World Rugby have officially announced the World Rugby nominees for the men's awards, which are taking place at the end of the month. And it's created quite a lot of controversy with regards to the system, for example, and when they start to separate things, when they don't separate things, and it's a bit of an interesting one. And I think that what we've realized, what I think I've realized is that they've got to find a lot more consistency regarding the way that we do the awards, the separation of the men's and the women's game, for example, what we award, how we award, what the criteria are for the award. Because at the moment it's just a panel, and the panel, for example, this year was Jacques Berger, Fiona Coughlin, Victor Matfield, Drew Mitchell, Ugo Monya, Sergio Parisi, Kieran Reid, and Blaine Scully. And so that's your World Rugby Awards panel, and they basically announced the nominations and the likes of that. And then after that, it all goes into voting. So, for example, the World Try of the Year is voted on completely by the fans, and but the actual awards committee or the panel will be the ones to have had to actually award the big ones, the breakthrough player of the year, the men's player of the year, etc., etc. Now, I think, for example, some of the nominations are very good nominations, but for me, my biggest frustration is that the criteria, this is the only criteria. This award is open to all men's 15s players who have played more than 1 year of international rugby. Voting is assessed on international test match performances. Club rugby is not recognised. That is for your world men's 15s player of the year. For the Dream Team, for example, it is open to all men's 15s players who have played international test matches in the voting year. Voting is assessed on international test match performances. Club rugby is not recognised. And Breakthrough Player of the Year, this award is open to all men's 15s players who have played no more than 1 year of international rugby. Voting is assessed on international test match performances. Club rugby is not recognised. So this is only on international performances. And if we look at, for example, the nominees, from a men's point of view, from a player point of view, and world's best player, these are the ones that have been nominated. I don't think it's an awful list. I think Tyke Byrne is somebody that could have been on this list. I think Artie Severe is somebody that's on the list. A lot of people talking about Tommy Freeman is potentially somebody who could be on this list. Obviously, as a Bok fan, you're not going to complain when you see 3 Springboks on here, and I think it's quite good to see that it's quite forward orientated, because how often do we see fly halves and wings dominate these awards? In fact, if you go look at the awards over the years, it's very much dominated by fly halves and wings. I mean, for example, Brian Abana has obviously won it from a wing point of view, from a snapping perspective. But if you go through let's go through the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, for example. So if we look at last year, the player of the year was Peter Steph Toy. The breakthrough player of the year was Wallace Titi. If you go look at 2023, the player of the year was Artie Severe. The breakthrough player of the year was Mark Talaya. So again, bang, there's another wing involved in there. If we go back to 2022, World Player of the Year, Josh van der Fleer in the 50s Player of the Year, and the breakthrough player of the year was Andrew Kupayutso. So we've had a bit of a run of loose forwards of late, but generally your backline players often stand. It's the flash players at the end of the day. It's your flash players that always sort of get the nominations, because they are at the crux of everything that's exciting. So that's why, for example, as mentioned, you got a Pio Diante who's won it previously. Johnny Sexton's won the World Player of the Year. You've got Jermaine Intermax, who's been a breakthrough player of the year. Peter Steph Toy, but before that, you've had Rico Awani, you've had Bowden Barrett, like times 2. So if you go look at all the different winners over the past decade and a bit, it very much favors backline versus forwards. That's starting to change slightly, but also it very much favors then within the forwards, you'll lose forwards. In fact, I don't think besides Brodie Retallick, I don't think a lock's ever won the World Player of the Year. And that there's no mistake. I don't think that's a mistake, for example, or that's by design. You got Richie McCaw, for example, who's won it previously in the likes of that. But again, it's always stayed within the loose forwards. Carl Berger has won it before. And Flyhouse and the likes of that. So if you look at, for example, this list, it's a lot more diverse than what we expected because it's a wing, a hooker, a front row, and a loose forward. Oxen Chair is actually the first ever prop to be nominated for men's 15s player of the year, which is quite a big achievement, and I'd love to see him go and win it. At the end of the day, the Springbok scrum is one of the biggest weapons in World Rugby, and a lot of that comes down to Oxen Chair, and that doesn't even factor in his open play, which is pretty brilliant. So it's always difficult to get down to a final four. Louis Biabari has scored tries for fun. I think he scored like 8 tries in the Six Nations, so he's had an incredible year. But again, we've got to try and remember that this is always down to international performances, not club rugby performances. Recently, Malcolm Marx obviously put his hand up and been phenomenal against France. Was very good against New Zealand and Argentina towards the back end of the Rugby Championship. Peter Stewart, the toy is obviously very consistent. But I think the problem comes, for example, you look at the World Breakthrough Player of the Year. Now, Henry Pollock's been nominated, and obviously he is the big news at the moment. He is the name on everybody's lips, whether you like him or not. He drives a lot of conversation. But Henry Pollock's played 115 minutes of Test match rugby in his career so far. To put it in perspective, Joseph Akusuali'i in the last calendar year has played over 1,000 minutes. So I don't really see how you've got somebody like a Henry Pollock in that conversation with a Joseph Akusuali'i, for example, who's played all those minutes. You got Ethan Hooker, I think he's played about 300 minutes. Fabian Holland's played about 400-500 minutes. They've all cemented themselves within international rugby. Henry Pollock's become a cameo specialist, which is fine. I mean, Kwaka Smith, for example, has made a career out of it, but he's just not played a lot of rugby. He had a great debut against Wales, the kind of worst team in the Six Nations, and he's had two cameos or the best of the last couple of weeks. But I think the biggest problem and the biggest thing that we've realized when it comes to this World Rugby Player of the Year, or the World Rugby Awards, for example, is the fact that there is no separation when it comes to World Coach of the Year. And that is creating a lot of conversation. Rassie Erasmus, for example, has been a head coach for over 50 games for the Boks. He has one of the greatest win percentages. If you look at the Boks in the last 3 years, 2023, 2024, 2025, they have averaged a win percentage of over 80%. I think we've dropped about 6 or 7 games in the last 3 years out of about, close on 40 plus type of thing. And not only has he not won, but he also hasn't been nominated because we've changed the goalpost, and we continuously change the goalpost of World Coach of the Year. So he won it back in 2019 and was nominated in 2018. In 2020, it wasn't held. In 2021, it was held. There were nominations. He wasn't nominated. We obviously won the British Irish Lions. We didn't have the best year. That part's fine. And he wouldn't have even been in the running because it would have been Jacques Nienaber. 2022, no nominations either for South Africa side. It was Wayne Smith who won it for New Zealand women. Andy Farrell was nominated alongside the likes of Fabian Galtier and Simon Middleton. But then the biggest fast came in 2023, where Andy Farrell, despite going out the quarterfinals, did win the World Coach of the Year, ahead of Ian Foster, Jacques Nienaber, who contested the final, Jacques Nienaber, who actually won the World Cup, and Simon Rawulu, who is obviously was the Fiji coach. Then all of a sudden, 2024, 2025, they haven't actually announced nominations. They've just announced a winner. And during those years, you look back at last year and the Boks, he beat the All Blacks twice, won the Freedom Cup, won the Nelson Challenge Cup, whatever, won the Champions, the Rugby Championship, lost 2 games, one against Ireland and one against Argentina in Argentina, and had a clean sweep in the Autumn Nations Series. But last year lost out for the first time ever that somebody won the award, to Jerome Duret, who was the Sevens coach of France. Never before have we even seen a Sevens coach be nominated for this award until last year, where France won the Olympics. So again, you kind of think, well, is this now moving goalposts? And then this year, the award gets awarded to John Mitchell at the end of the Women's World Cup. And once again, there are no nominations. Now, England won the Women's World Cup. Okay? So, by all means, it's a good nomination to have. England have also been ranked number 1 in the world by about 5 or 6 ranking points for the last 5 years. So John Mitchell took the best team in the world by a long way and won the World Cup with them at home. And that is ahead of Rassie Erasmus, for example, who has, in the last calendar year, because it starts now basically, if we look at even November coming into it, because that's when the awards are done just after November, but the nominations are done before, has lost 2 matches. In that, a record defeat against New Zealand, a record defeat against Argentina, beat France in France, and had been the number 1 side for all but 1 week the entire year. And I think it's not even so much the win rate, for example, and you start comparing the win rate. Look at how Rassie Erasmus won these games. 3 red cards, 3 wins, for example, this year. Look at the way the Boks are using the bench. Look at the way they are adapting. Look at how they've rotated players. It's not like it's one team that they've just taken week in, week out and winning. He is redefining the way the game is played. He is redefining the way squads are used. He is revolutionizing the game and is still not getting any sort of accolade for it or any sort of recognition for the fact that he is literally revolutionizing rugby at the moment. I think everyone in the world, if you ask them who is the best coach in the world, they will tell you it's Rassie Erasmus right now. But not World Rugby. And the fact that they awarded those awards prematurely, I think, even if John Mitchell wins the award, to award it so prematurely is really, really poor in itself. You should be having this ceremony at the end of November, bring the Women's Award winners in for it and celebrate them again. By all means, celebrate them again. Then announce the World Coach of the Year, because it's just become a bit of a farce, to be honest. The fact that, going in, this is no longer going to be an award ceremony because there's only 3 awards to be handed out. So it'll just be announced on social media type of thing, and there'll be a photo shoot, a big whoop. So I think they completely lost the plot when it comes to the awards in general, in all honesty. But that's what I think the frustration is. And ever since he got banned from World Rugby, he's definitely obviously not been on in the good books. But the fact of the matter is, I think that he is widely recognized by all rugby people as the best coach in the world, but is not getting the plaudits for it. And we don't need it. We'll continue doing what we continue to do. That's kind of how the South Africans do. But it's just sad, isn't it, that he is going to be remembered as one of the most iconic coaches ever. At this stage, might only win one. Steve Hansen, for example, won 4. And he deserved them. I'm not saying he didn't deserve them, but he did win 4. And there have been times, for example, and I'll go back to the Andy Farrell one. There have been times where, a coach who didn't win the World Cup won the coach of the year. Michael Cheika won in 2015 when Australia got to the final. But Andy Farrell getting to a quarterfinal and losing the quarterfinal and getting World Coach of the Year was a bit of a joke. So it is frustrating. And Graham Henry won it 5 times, Steve Hansen 4 times. Even Jake White's won it more times than Rassie Erasmus. He's won it with 2. So it's weird. And I think the problem is, I think it's difficult for World Rugby to keep up, its credibility when they keep shifting goalposts all the entire time. You go to a reset on these awards. You've got to understand, right, what are the awards? What do we want to recognize? We want to recognize the best men's players in the 15s game. We want to recognize the best men's players in the 7s games. We want to recognize the best 15s players in the women's game, etc. for the 7s game. And then how do you recognize the best coach in the world? Because is the best coach a 7s coach, for example, who takes Kenya and wins the series? Is the best coach somebody who takes the best team in the world to a different height and to win trophies with them? Is the best coach somebody who redefines the way the game is played and starts to really change things in such a way that, the game is being changed across the way in a good way, for example? Is it about the way they play, the amount of tries they score, the entertainment factor? And there's so many different factors. Personally, I think you should just keep it very, very simple and separated by women's and men's rugby, and have a men's coach of the year and a women's coach of the year. And if you want to, have a men's sevens coach of the year and a women's sevens coach of the year, because they're all so different. They've got their own intricacies. You can't compare the men's game with the women's game. It's completely different. There's no, women's rugby championship, for example. There's completely different competitions. You've got the WX2 and the WX1 and the WX3 and the likes of that. It's completely different as a game. The structures are different. The amount of games they play is different. The professionalism in the game is different. There's no professional league in South Africa, for example, for women's rugby. The Prem Women's Division is phenomenal. And the best players in the world are playing there. It's no wonder that the England are dominating women's rugby. But you then can't you're not comparing apples with apples. And I think that's the frustration. And I think you could really do a very cool award ceremony, but you've got to be able to break it down to different categories and celebrate. And if it means celebrating more people, then why not? Why not at the end of the day? Why not separate it? Because it just makes it a lot clearer when you're winning it, for example, what the parameters are. And I think that would be a long way towards adding the credibility to the awards, to which at the moment I just don't think there is a lot. To be perfectly honest. Let's go to some of the comments, shall we? Petro Nerva says, been watching numerous pods. Rassie is praised by everyone, but will Rugby different ideas? Matt asking, any idea when the team's announced for Ireland on Thursday? Ricky Lowe says, I feel this past weekend gives a false perception where Ireland are as a team. I think we might actually smash them, especially considering a lot of our guys have rested last week and very match fit. I think this weekend will give a better indication of where Ireland are. I think that I kind of get what you're saying. I think that Ireland, especially for example against New Zealand, weren't at their best. Maybe even during the Six Nations. Maybe they're not the dominant side I think they were previously. I think they're still a very, very good side. I think this weekend's still going to be close. I'm definitely not going to go and think it's going to be a runaway. I think the Boks will have to be at their best to beat them. I think if both teams are at their best this weekend, the Boks win, because I think we've got a much higher threshold, much higher ceiling than what Ireland do at the moment, and are probably playing better rugby and probably in better form. But I wouldn't go as far as to say I think it's going to be a big score. Johannes says, when last did we beat Ireland in Ireland? I think it was like 2015 or something like that. 2012, actually. Yeah, so I think it was 13 years since we've beaten Ireland in Ireland. So it's a big game. And that's why I keep saying this is potentially our hardest game of the year. Yes, Eden Park, to a certain degree. But I think that Ireland has just been a team that have been a bogey team for us for so long. At Cannon says, Pollard does play off the bench as an impact player, and my word, does he make an impact? I think it's a fair nomination. Rugby is becoming a bench game. He's going to be a bench superstar. I don't mind, as I said, I don't mind the bench part of it, but he's just played so little rugby at the international stage. Bowen Fence has played more rugby than he has this year, and he's been hooked almost every single, in the first half, almost every single game. It's Zach Paulton's played 2 games, and I think has played half as much minutes as Henry Pollock has this year. So I'm not doubting his impact off the bench, but I think if we look at his international career, purely his international career, he had a phenomenal debut against Wales, by all means, fantastic, really good, very impressive, 2 tries on debut. And then he came off last weekend to good effect, and he's looked good. But I think, we confused that when he was playing for the British and Irish Lions against the Australian sides, those weren't test matches. So I think that it's been inflated. I personally think it generally has been inflated by the personality versus if you look at his outputs in the year of rugby of 115 minutes test match rugby, I don't think that he's better than another 3, for example. Getting the nomination, I don't mind, but if he wins it, I will have a problem with it because I think that other players have had bigger impacts this year for their sides, are more established internationals, are, for me, again, ranked higher as players in terms of the international career they've had so far than he has. But we'll have to wait and see, won't we? Just as well wait and see if Biabari becomes the only non-South African in the list, but wins the actual award. So it's going to be an interesting one, though. It is going to be very interesting. John Wright says, we don't need the award. We know Rassie is on top. And Claus says, if they go to 14 men, Ireland have to play very smart and not play bash-up rugby. They have to spread the ball wide and use wrap-around plays to infuse box. France and Italy failed to do that. Well, I'll tell you what, as I said, over the weekend, Ireland did look much better. Probably the best I've seen in place in a while. And Mac Hansen with a hat-trick in the first half. Will you see him at full-back once again? I mean, it certainly looked like he coped, didn't it? I'll be interested to sort of see what that pack's going to look like. And I think, for example, how they're going to use their front row. Will they start an Andrew Porter next to Ty Furlong and Dan Sheehan? Will they leave him on the bench? And as an impact player, for example, we've seen Paddy McCarthy starting. And I do think that the front rows are a position, or front rows is a position of concern for Ireland in the last couple of years. And now we're starting to see, them having to blood new players because they haven't, they're all aging. And they are bringing a new generation through, and it's been long overdue. But that's what I'm interested to see. Are they going to go with the usual, your usual starters, or are you going to leave an Angie Porter on the bench, try and nullify the impact that Wilco Lowe is going to have in the second half? Look, I think Wilco Lowe will do a job on Angie Porter if he does do that. But it'll be interesting to sort of see how they navigate that and how they try and reduce the impact that the Boks have currently off the bench with the likes of Andre Esterhuizen, a Kwagga Smith, a Gerard Steenekamp, a Wilco Lowe, a Grant Williams, if we go Moyniba, which I really hope we do. So there's a lot, and a bit of a game of cat and mouse, really. The Irish team is being announced after our team, a couple of hours after our team. So we're not going to do what we did with Italy, where we kind of let Italy announce their team and then announce ours. We actually did the same thing with France. So we are still going to announce before. So, but obviously you can still make tweaks, inverted commas. But we definitely are not going to give them a full week of preparation with the team, and that kind of indicate that maybe there are going to be some surprises. And this is the biggest thing I think that Rassie has done this year, and the Boks have done so well. Because we've rotated so much, because we've changed things, because we've changed things up, because we've mixed a lot of players, for example, used so many different players in different situations, even in different positions. I've mentioned this before, we've become a massively difficult side to predict and to plan for, because now you are in training. Are you running drills to defend against or to attack a Kane Moody or Jesse Creel at outside centre? Two very different players. Damien Willemse, Damien Delendo, or Andre Esterhuizen at inside centre. Are you basically planning for Moyniba at 10, a Sasha at 10, a 100 Pollard at 10 in the second half when those come on? How do you work between those? And that I think is a very, very positive part, is the fact that it becomes so unpredictable with how we're going to go about things. And that's become a huge asset to us, because it means that teams are going to have to really overanalyze us. And we've also got the ability to change as we want to. And we've been trying to build that throughout the year. Different playing style, for example, being able to, even during games, switch things up and play in a different way. And maybe sometimes go back to the traditional sort of 10-man rugby approach and be nice and physical, versus then trying to open things up and have a go and try and score tries and put them on the back foot, etc., etc. So it's a very healthy position to be in. And that's where I think that our true advantage currently lies, is the fact that we've become a very difficult team to prepare for. It's not like I think Ireland, for example, got found out at a stage where a lot of people were analysing them, and they kind of realised how they kind of played, and you kind of almost planned for, inverted commas, because they were very consistent with their team selection. The Boks have been very different about that. So it's a cool position to be in. I'll be interested to see what then, and that's why we kind of know more or less what our starting pack for me is going to look like. A couple of question marks in the back line, but it's the bench and the makeup of the bench that I think is going to be the most interesting. Do they back Moyniba this weekend, or will we see a 100 Pollard? And that for me is going to be a huge selection and a very big difference to plan from an Irish point of view for those two different flower halves. And which one do you plan for? Do you have to plan for all three, for example? How much do you focus on them versus how much do you focus on yourselves? That's also a big thing. How much do you sit there talking about how do we diffuse the Boks? How do we plan against them? How do we nullify their stuff? Versus a certain amount of, well, at the end of the day, we're just focusing on ourselves, and we're going to sit there and we can create a system where we can I'll play in the way we want to play. It doesn't really matter what they throw at us, because we back ourselves to be able to cope with it on the day. So there's always a fine line between giving your opposition enough respect and planning for your opposition, as well as making sure that you prioritize what you are doing, what your systems are, how you're going to beat them using what you're good at. And that's always the big, I think, balancing act that coaches and performance analysts have to go through, is how much attention do you pay on your opposition versus how much attention do you pay to yourself. And there's no real right and wrong answer, because sometimes you might have to really try and play a game plan to nullify an opposition. Sometimes you got to just back your game plan and say, well, I think that the way we play is going to be too much for them anyway, with the way they play. And that's where the best in the world start to really come out in these sort of scenarios, because they understand that, and they understand what the balance is and when to focus on yourself and when to focus on others. In terms of the team that I think we're going to see, I mean, it's going to be an interesting decision to try and make, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong selection. To be honest, I think that that's also a very positive thing. We've got so many different options, and they've all performed that we kind of really quite comfortable with the players that we have, and it doesn't really matter who does play or who's going to play, because we back them to be able to get a job. But the big thing I think is that I want you guys to get your teams locked in. So make sure you go and predict your side on mypicks.app. Right now, we had a lot of predictions yesterday. We need to try and keep the momentum and see how many you can get right, because I think it's going to be quite a fun week. Next week, I think, will be the most fun, because we really don't know what next week's going to be like. And I think, obviously, if we get the result this weekend, we've got license to rotate next weekend and really have a go at Wales with a potentially quite a fresh team and quite a new team, and try and build our systems. But go and get involved and join the, I think there's over 100 odd predictions that were made yesterday. So go and get your team locked in. Go and sign for my picks as well. You can go predict the score. You can rate the players. More sports coming in as well. So it's an exciting time for the platform, and get involved. And let me know in the comments, if you're watching this retrospectively, what your team is and what changed you. I announced my kind of an early prediction of a team yesterday. Let me know what you think of that. And I'm very keen to see what happens when we do our team prediction tomorrow, when we pick the actual team, or what it's going to look like. So please do smash like on the way out. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve.